Tzeentch, of course, has one of the most intriguing campaigns in the game. Instead of the head-on attack strategy that a lot of other factions have, they more benefit from some work behind the scenes to achieve their goals without hardly any direct conflict if possible. This adds up to a very unique playstyle that can be tough to get used to, but extremely rewarding once you do get used to it. Let's begin by going over the pros and cons of the Tzeentch campaign gameplay. As for the pros, they have control over the winds of magic, like no other faction, which allows you to take full advantage of spells in your battles. The changing of ways also offers many ways to twist events into your favour and turn the enemy's campaign upside down to give yourself some of the most unfair advantages in the game. And the teleportation stance allows you to navigate the map and worm your way into places you have no business being, and the enemy can't really do much to stop you. As for the cons, early on when you don't have a lot of winds to play with, it can be pretty rough trying to survive without maximum spell usage or the buffs of having high magic reserves. The grimoires also take a while to stockpile early on, meaning you have to choose very carefully what to spend them on. And finally, the teleportation does come at the cost of a lot of magic reserves, meaning you can find yourself in a tricky position if you land on the other side and there aren't a lot of winds to replenish your reserves. At the moment, Tzeentch only has one playable faction, the Oracles of Tzeentch, and they are led by Kairos, Fateweaver. For their faction effects, they are granted plus 100% enemy reinforcement time accuracy, which basically means when an enemy army is reinforcing, you can tell when they're going to arrive before you get into the battle. They also gain minus 50% battle reinforcement time for friendly armies, and plus 15% to hero action success chance. As for Kairos' Lord effects, he grants minus 50% chance to enemy hero success chance, and plus 50% to ambush defense chance. The faction starts at the Volary, and the starting units are 3 Blue Horrors, 1 Pink Horror, 1 Burning Chariot of Tzeentch, Chaos Furies of Tzeentch, and a Soul Grinder of Tzeentch. As for their climate preferences, Frozen, Magical Forest, Wasteland, Chaotic Wasteland, Temperate and Temperate Island are suitable, Mountain, Savannah and Jungle are unpleasant, and Ocean and Desert are uninhabitable. For their expansion, the starting wall will take you southwest towards Nurgle. You can continue expanding in that direction as much as you want, as long as you don't irritate the Ogres or Cathay, you should be pretty safe to keep moving west. If you want to complete your starting province, you can head to the northeast and take over the Warriors of Chaos there, and eventually move into Cathay, should you feel so inclined. This should give you plenty of lands to win the campaign, but if you want to expand even more for fun, you can head deep into Cathay, as long as you don't get too involved in the mountains, as those climate preferences can really make it slow. Coming now to the faction mechanics, first up we have the teleportation stance, and this is a pretty simple one. Any Tzeentch army can spend 40 winds of magic reserve to teleport on the campaign map. This can allow them to get through terrain that would otherwise be impassable, such as mountains or getting past enemies. It is extremely useful, but should be used carefully, as it may not be worth teleporting somewhere if it means you don't have any winds of magic once you get there. Next up we have the winds of magic manipulation. Every province in the game has a limited amount of winds of magic, and normally the levels are constantly ebbing and flowing in a seemingly random order. When playing as Tzeentch, you can manipulate this in whichever way you desire. Any province you own even a single settlement in, you can raise and lower the levels, transferring them from one province to another. This allows you to send winds wherever you want and allow your armies to make use of as many spells as they want, alongside making full use of the teleportation stance. Just be sure to keep an eye on this as you move through the map, as it is for sure worth keeping on top of, since magic really is the most powerful part of the Tzeentch army. Next we come to the changing of the ways and grimoires. Grimoires are a second currency in the faction, and they are earned via pretty much everything, such as battles, buildings, characters, events, looting, sacking and raiding, and certain unholy manifestations. They are then spent on changing of the ways, certain events, and certain technologies. The changing of the ways allow you to perform a lot of different actions. Reveal faction intentions shows you where each army in the target faction is going to move for the next turn for a small cost. Reveal Shroud gives you vision over a faction's entire territory for 5 turns at a pretty low cost. Track Army allows you to see wherever a faction army goes and gain its line of sight for 5 turns, and another cheap one. Forced Rebellion, unsurprisingly, causes a rebellion in a target settlement for a small cost. Halt Faction prevents all characters in a faction from moving for a single turn for a low cost. Open Gates, unsurprisingly, causes that settlement's walls to open their gates for 5 turns, which of course makes sieges a little easier, and is another cheap one. Break Alliance, of course, can break a military or defensive alliance between 2 factions, and this one can be extremely expensive. Give War Coordination Target, of course, gives a War Coordination Target to any faction, regardless of their opinion with you. And Transfer Settlement, of course, transfers a settlement from any faction to another, and this cost is variable based on the average relations between the 2 factions and the average Tzeentch corruption in the target settlements. Force War, of course, forces a war between 2 factions for a pretty high cost, depending on the factions and their relations. Unlike all the other Chaos factions, Tzeentch can make use of unholy manifestations as you spread more Tzeentch corruption around the world. Scribers of Insanity is unlocked from the start and grants 250 grimoires at the cost of preventing army movement range for 2 turns. Mutagenic Energies requires 1000 corruption and causes 1 turn of attrition to an enemy army regardless of any immunities. Magic Flare grants 25% barrier HP and plus 20% range for an army for 3 turns. Night of Madness requires 3000 corruption and grants 15 Winds of Magic reserves per turn, minus 50 control for the enemy local province, and plus 25% Tzeentch corruption at the cost of preventing a friendly army from moving for 3 turns. Of course, alongside this, they also take part in the Great Game. Whichever Chaos faction has the most corruption worldwide gets powerful buffs to the manifestations. Scribes of Insanity now grants 500 grimoires, Mutagenic Energies increases the attrition by 25%, Magic Flare increases the barrier by 40% and range by 30%, and Night of Madness now increases Winds of Magic by 25 and Tzeentch Corruption by 35. And finally, they also have access to the cults, and cults appear when Tzeentch Corruption is high in an area, and they allow you to build one of 4 buildings. Sanctuaries, which grant 10 grimoires per turn, Repositories, which grant 20 grimoires per turn when the Winds of Magic are strong or higher, Sanctums, which grants 100 income per turn when the Winds of Magic are strong or higher, and Campuses, which increase the Winds of Magic in that province and adjacent provinces up to Tempestuous, but destroys the cult upon completion. Now we come to the Lord skills, starting of course with Kairos Fateweaver. Now you're going to grab the spells straight after Root Marcher, since without them, Kairos kinda sucks. Grab all of that lore of Tzeentch because the spells are all bloody brilliant. After that, you can grab one of the fragments to pick up some spells from another lore. Of course, you can go for your preferred lore here, but personally, Lore of Shadows is hard to beat, since Pendulum is just so perfectly balanced. Then go into the Oracle of Eternity and pick up pretty much everything since it's unique to him and pretty dang powerful. Now we finally want to go into the blue tree and reduce the cost of changing the ways and the cooldown to get Lightning Strike. Then get some casualty replenishment rate and upkeep to get Renowned and Feared. You can then get into the red line to pick up some buffs to your endgame units and some abilities, though magic is your greatest asset and the army is honestly secondary. Finally get to the top row and grab any buffs and abilities you desire. Now we come to the Heralds of Tzeentch, and you can get these with the Lore of Tzeentch or the Lore of Metal. Similar to Kairos, you want to get Root Marcher and then go right into the spells since they really are the only power of these lords, whichever lore you go for. Then you want to head into the blue tree and go for Despoilers and Corruption to get to Draftmaster. Then you can of course go into Lightning Strike, Upkeep Reduction and Scrolls of Destiny, and of course Renowned and Feared. Upon reaching level 13, you can choose from one of their 3 Locust skills. Of course, the red line buffs your unit, so pick some up for your endgame army, but focus on your spells before even thinking about this, since they really do carry your battles. No yellow line here, as these lads are really not meant to be fighters. You can choose between one of their 2 mounts, Discs of Tzeentch, which allow them to fly and fire on the move, with high speed and increased survivability, and Burning Chariots, which furthers these buffs with more HP, some actual weapon damage, allowing them to charge in and deal a ton of damage with spells and charging, but does obviously make them into a very large target with low melee defense. And finally, you want to go to the top row for Missile Resist, Bonuses versus Nurgle, and Immortality. And of course, just like all of the other Chaos factions, the Heralds of Tzeentch, of course, evolve into Greater Demons, in this case the Exalted Lords of Tzeentch upon reaching level 15. They of course come with the same 2 laws of magic as the Heralds, and they have basically the same skill tree aside from a couple of small differences. They have no Locust talents, no mounts, and a couple of new top row skills that unlock you some abilities. We now come to the heroes. First up we have the Cultists. On the campaign map, these can damage walls, wound characters, hinder replenishment, spread corruption locally, and increase mobility when embedded in an army. They only have access to the Lore of Fire, and these guys are great to have in your armies since they are the only way to get that lore on the field, which is a top tier damaging lore. You of course want to grab increased mobility, then go right into the spells and pick up everything they have because they are all excellent. Once you can, you want to grab the Chaos Steed Mount to make them even faster and get their spells wherever needed. You also want to grab the Gate of Tzeentch abilities for some top tier summons. Then if you want some Missile Resist, buffs versus Nurgle, and of course Immortality as soon as you can. Our other heroes are the Iridescent Horrors. These can assault units, assassinate characters, assault garrisons, spread control locally, and provide training when embedded in an army. You can get these with the Lore of Tzeentch or the Lore of Metal, and depending on what you want to use these heroes for, you'll pick up something different. If you're keeping them on the campaign map, then pick up everything on the blue line but training. If they're being used in battle, then pick up training for some passive XP, grab every single one of those spells since that is their entire power, and without them, they are useless. Pick up one of the 3 Locust skills when you can at level 13, and choose from one of these same 2 mounts that the Lords have. And finally, pick up any buffs for fighting Nurgle, some Missile Resist, and Immortality. We now come to the commandments. Egrim's Contrivance Algorithm reduces the chance of plague spreading by 40%, increases research rate by 10%, and the chance of Winds of Magic increasing by 25%. This is a good one to have on your settlements when you don't need them to do anything else, since the research rate will help you speed through that tree. The Architect's Theorem grants 4 control and minus 20% campaign move range for enemy armies starting their turn in the region. This one is of course great for control problems and slowing enemies in your lands. Mutalisf Prism Formulae increases grimoires from buildings by 50%, and is of course great for farming grimoires, and Fosterculls increases Tzeentch corruption locally by 3 and by 1 in adjacent provinces, and of course is great for spreading that corruption as much as you can. And now finally we come to the research tree, and the Tzeentch tree has 4 different sections that can all be accessed from the main hub. And honestly, aside from this, it's a pretty standard tree full of buffs for units, infrastructure and income, alongside unlocking different changing of the ways, and spells for a lot of change units. Just go through it and pick up any buffs that will be relevant to you now or very soon in the future, and of course build for the late game as much as you can. That is everything you need to know about the Tzeentch campaign gameplay. If you enjoyed this video, then consider leaving it a like, and of course subscribe to see more videos like this, including the Tzeentch battle guide coming on Friday. Leave any questions you have in the comments below and I'll answer them as best I can. I'd like to take this time to thank some supporters of the channel like Donick Shmas and Adam T, and of course Henry Tucker for their support at that Unclean Ones tier. If you'd like to support the channel, you can become a member here on YouTube, a subscriber on Twitch, or a patron on Patreon. Doing so gets you shoutouts at the end of videos, just like all of these wonderful people. Huge thanks to all supporters, one final thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.